Hello everybody and welcome to Education Angels webinar. Tonight we're going to be talking about behaviours. So I'm Angie Stead, for those of you who have not met me before, and I am the Managing Director of Education Angels, but also I am really passionate about early childhood and have childcare centres as well. And I think the early years is the most important time in our lives. So my goal is for every educator, every parent, anybody that's got anything to do with children, to be able to support them to actually have the best life, to be able to relax and really enjoy our time with our young people by taking away a lot of the stress. And in order to do that, it's about reaching a point of understanding about what's normal behaviors, what's maybe of concern, and how to support you best in dealing with your children's behavior. So I'm just going to start by sharing screen, because I think looking at images is a lot more interesting than just looking at my face. So here we go. So like I say, tonight it's about what your child's behavior is telling you. So bear with me 1 second, make it a lot clearer. So when we're looking at behaviors, it's really, why is behavior challenging? Why do we as educators and parents find it so stressful? And there are a number of reasons for that. One of them being that we want our children to be liked. We are social beings, and we think that if our children are popular, if they're liked by others, then they're going to be leading a much happier life. And there's certainly a lot of truth in that. Also, for us, we fear that people will judge us. They'll judge our parenting skills, or they might judge our teaching skills. And I don't know about you, but during my career, during my time as a parent and a grandparent, I've certainly had that feeling many a time where, maybe my children were throwing tantrums or not behaving in a maybe acceptable way, and depending on the circumstances. So for many of us, that can be a bit of a fear that we have going on. We might fear that we ourselves could lose control, because very often when we're dealing with challenging behaviours, we can feel an immense amount of frustration and sometimes even anger, and we might be frightened that we're going to lose control of our own emotions. So also attached to that, we also don't like to see our children in distress. So it can cause a lot of anxiety for us and upset. And more often than not, all of this is caused by the fact that we're unsure how to respond, and we're frightened that we'll do the wrong thing in any given situation, but certainly the wrong thing by our children. So we all want the very best for our children, and that's why we find particular behaviors challenging, because it brings up many of these stresses. I don't know whether anybody on this call can relate to that, whether you've had situations where you've felt these emotions and you've been fearful of being judged by other people, or, actually had stresses around, I'm having challenges with my slides, having stresses around fearing that you're not doing the right thing for your child. So I think any parent will be able to relate to at least one, if not all of these situations. So I have a trusty assistant, Sam, on the call. Now, Sam, I can't see chat or questions when I'm presenting the slides. So I might need you to prompt me if there are some questions that come up.
Sure.
Thank you very much. So dealing with challenging behaviours also can be triggering. It can bring up suppressed feelings and emotions for ourselves. We might have had childhood experiences where we've suffered trauma, stress, anxiety, or we might feel badly about what's happened in the past. And sometimes when our children are demonstrating these challenging behaviours, it can bring up a lot of those emotions that maybe we didn't even realise we were still carrying. So remember too that children act out their feelings. So children are fantastic communicators. You will know if you've upset your child because they will find a way of making sure that they communicate that to you, and it's normally by actions. So I would say it's quite an efficient, if not sometimes embarrassing, way to communicate their needs. So they act out the feelings such as, in a way, like shouting and screaming. So they're not always aware what other people might think, or the fact that they're maybe in a library or a church or in a place where it might not be so appropriate to be shouting and screaming. So it can cause a little bit of anxiety for educators and parents. Also, they'll often lash out. They don't have the same level of impulse control. So, you know, what are they communicating when we have them hitting, biting, kicking, etc.? And they're biting, like good timing, and kicking. So, and of course, throwing things as well. Children will often throw things out of frustration, and the result can be that things get broken, people get hurt, but more often than not, it's an impulsive reaction from the child. They're not being naughty, they're just expressing their feelings. And of course, there are many other feelings that children act out, and withdrawal, you know, going quiet, you know, sulking. I'm sure we could list a whole host of other examples. So some common triggers for this are, you know, wanting something they can't have. We and Sam were talking before, and we were saying, like, you know, when you look at a toddler, they're so amazing. Like, they're such small little people, and they've been on this planet for such a short amount of time. And yet they have amazing ways to express their feelings and communicate their needs and desires. But of course, they don't have the lifetime of experience and the cognitive ability yet to always make sense of why they can't have something that they want. So, you know, that could be a trigger. They might want a toy in a toy shop, and you can't have that toy, you know, and they don't always understand why that's not possible. So it can trigger a bit of a response from them. They can be upset by something that's been said to them. You'll often hear children saying things like, well, I'm not your friend anymore, or you're not coming to my party. Now, when that happens, the child is reacting in the moment and not really meaning what they say. You'll have seen this many a time, you know, 2 minutes later, they're best friends again, and they're going back to their party, and they're all very happy. But in the moment it's said, the child who it's being said to does not understand that this is just a momentary feeling. It's a reaction from the child, and it'll all be okay in the future. They don't have that life experience. So when that's said to a child, they can get really, really upset about that. And that can cause some unwanted behavior too. Not wanting to do something they need to do. Like, I remember with one of my sons, every morning was a battleground because he hated getting dressed. And if he had his way, he'd be walking around naked half the time. And that was not very smart in the middle of winter in the UK. And also sometimes they're overstimulated and feeling overwhelmed. And that, you know, even for adults, that can be a very difficult thing to express to other people. You know, when you have that prickly feeling and you just want to go and have time on your own, you know, children feel that too. And we are often, as adults, we put children in situations where they might be in very stimulating situations for hours on end, and it can be very challenging to cope with. So this is why it's really important to understand our children's natural temperaments, because some children will have tiny bit of tolerance for this, and other children might be okay in it for most of the time. And of course, overexcitement. I mean, I'm sure many of you have said it, but you'll have certainly heard it, you know, or this is going to end up in tears. When children get really, really excited and they're running around like crazy, you know, very often it ends in a situation where the child becomes overwhelmed and has a bit of a meltdown. And it's because they're trying to cope with the energy and the excitement and really don't know how to self-regulate. So we talked about, now we're going backwards, this is good, right? So we talked about the common triggers. they were external triggers for disruptive behavior that had an impact on the child internally. But the internal triggers come down to 4 basic points. One of them is exuberance, childhood enthusiasm. Children will all go all guns blazing and throw themselves into activities and experiences very often without thinking about it. And that can actually create situations where you might find that they have challenging behaviors because of maybe accidentally hurting someone, and many other examples. Exploration is another one. Children are innately curious and they will follow their curiosity. Now that relates to behaviors as well. So if you think about situations at home where you might have, I don't know, one family member is very routine based and great with setting boundaries and rules, and the children know exactly what's expected and when it's expected. Then you might have your partner who is very free flowing and come day go day and quite relaxed about everything. Now there's nothing wrong with either of those personalities, but what we need to do as parents and educators is make sure that we say, right, with regards to the rules and boundaries for children, we need to agree that this is how we're going to deal with this situation. Because if we don't and we're inconsistent, then children will use their natural curiosity and explore the boundaries. And what that looks like is many more opportunities for children to demonstrate challenging behaviors, because they'll just keep pushing buttons and try testing you until they find the point at which the boundary is set. So also children often will make behavioral mistakes because they don't know any better. So lack of life experience. And sometimes the lack of understanding as well. Children can lose control of their emotions because our emotions actually are responsible for all of how we feel about all of life's experiences. You can't have any experience in life without having an emotional response to it. We might not always be consciously aware of what that response is, and very often we're not until it's an extreme response, but there's always an emotion attached to an experience. So our children are learning so much about themselves and how to regulate their emotions in every single learning experience and every single interaction they have throughout the day, which is pretty amazing, and there's such a lot for them to learn. So our responsibility is to actually allow children to make behavioral mistakes, understand that actually most of the challenging behavior, in fact 25% of challenging behavior, is children just being children. It's because of one of these 4 internal triggers, and the other 75% is actually children being children too, and that is the other 75% is how we deal with the challenging behaviors, how we respond to this 25%. So and the response we need, and the important thing is to have realistic expectations of your child, because if your expectations are realistic, then you're less likely to set them up for failure. And not that any of us consciously do that, but we have to expect that children will make behavioral mistakes. Sometimes just understand that unacceptable behavior is an opportunity to teach, not to reprimand, and there are certain ways you can do that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And understand too, there's no one size fits all model. One approach doesn't work on all children, and any of you that have had more than one child yourself will know that's true. With your first, you think, right, finally I've mastered bedtime routines, and finally my child will get dressed without there being any resistance, and he's no longer throwing tantrums, and you feel like you're actually getting somewhere. And this is quite good, this parenting lock. Then you have your second child, and your second child throws that rule book out the window straight away and comes with a whole new set of rules that you have to work out, you have to seek to understand. And this is why we need to look at our children's natural temperaments and natural dispositions, because everybody is different. And again, that links back to, first seeking to understand, getting to know your child so you can set them up for success. And knowing that all behavior is a form of communication. So it is an attempt to meet a physical or emotional need. So we need to look at what that behavior is telling us. And in order to do that, then we need to understand how they're feeling. Are they feeling overwhelmed? Observe their behavior over a period of time. So if you find that every time you go to the supermarket, your child has a meltdown, then don't blame the supermarket. Look at the situation. Look at why your child might be feeling overwhelmed in that situation. Is it because they don't like crowds? Is it because they don't like bright lights? Is it too noisy for them? Is it quite scary? There are many, many reasons why children have meltdowns in situations like supermarkets. They've not yet learned to control their excitement. It's very hard for children to be able to feel a high level of joy, excitement, and exuberance over something, and then suddenly need to stop and listen and respond appropriately because suddenly the situation's changed. We've come in for lunch, or somebody's come to visit, or now you need to take your child on the school run, for example. To switch from that totally immersed in excitement and fun to now having to change energy really quickly and control their emotions and control their energy so they bring it down to a lot more relaxed state, can be really, really challenging. And it takes lots of practice. And even for us adults, that can be hard as well. And of course, they're still learning impulse control. They act out their feelings. So it takes some time for children to learn to pause and think about what's happening and control their impulses. And it's our responsibility to teach that as well. But like I say, in doing so, expect many behavioural mistakes as well. And of course, they're still learning social skills. A library is another room. A classroom is just another area to go and play. They don't necessarily understand all these rules that we have around how we behave in a restaurant or how we behave in the library, etc., etc. And of course, very often children are struggling because there's so much stimulation. And we live in a world there's so much coming at children, from flashing signs, TV, tablets, phones, all the artificial lighting, and the busyness, the radio on, etc., etc. It's all very, very stimulating. And for some children, they can struggle quite a lot with that. And of course, some children can't cope with large groups of people. And we want all children to learn social skills, and we want all children to be able to get along with other people and to be able to cope for periods of time around groups of people. But to just expect it to be okay and expect children to be able to deal with any situation can be quite a big ask of us adults. And we tend to do that a lot of the time. And of course, self-regulation can be really, really challenging. So I'm wondering, Sam, has anybody, well, this is to everybody, has anybody here had moments where they've had an absolutely nightmare of a situation with their child's behavior, or where you're struggling with a persistent behavior, or you're concerned about your child's behavior? Because if we've got time, if Sam doesn't mind reading out any questions or examples, we can talk about them on this call. Are we all good to do that, Sam?
Yes. Kindly pop in your questions or your concerns. We'll make sure to address that during the Q&A session.
And if we don't have time on the call, if we've not answered all the questions, I'm happy to just do email responses and we can send it out with the recording as well. Cool, thank you for that. So our ability to cope in any given situation is very much dependent on our natural temperament. And I'm sure if you think about, people in your life, even maybe the difference between your parents or yourself and your partner, many people, everybody is uniquely, perfectly imperfect. And we all have a natural temperament, which will, to a large extent, dictate how we cope in certain situations. So, and it's the same for children as well. We're all unique. And like I say, absolutely individuals. And we have different strengths and abilities. And they also depend on our natural temperament as well. So, and we call this, with this, our natural genius, our natural ability, our natural strengths are the innate genius within. So the ancient Romans believed that the word genius was derived actually from the ancient Romans and the Latin term of ingenium, which is as above. Basically, it's the blend in the concept of the divine and the talented. So it's the unique spirit that resides in our body for the whole of our lives. And that dictates how we respond to the world. That dictates our natural temperament and our natural dispositions. So just before we go on to talk about what they are, I think we had a raised hand. Sam, do we have any questions?
Not at the moment.
Oh, good.
Oh, we have one. We have from Olivia Hannah. I'm concerned about my 20-month-old boy hitting me on the face sometimes, and it makes me feel very upset. I feel you, Olivia.
It's funny, we were talking about that before. So
it happened to me before the webinar.
And it's quite common, and children will lash out. So if that happens, right, children, I wonder, how old is he? How old is the child you're talking about? 20-month-old. Yeah, that's about right. And that's about the stage. So it's the case of, oh yeah, I'm wearing glasses, it's more annoying. Of course it is. Yeah, glasses are not cheap. So yeah, it's a case of children lack the impulse control. So, if you're down at a child's level and you happen to be saying something the child doesn't like, it can sometimes just be an impulsive reaction for them to lash out and smack you or, hurt you in some way. Now, as adults, of course, we know that's not acceptable behavior. But for children, they don't yet have the control of their emotions and impulses to be able to stop and think about what they're doing before they do it. So it's a case of helping him to understand that it's not good to hit. And what I found is to visibly show that you're upset, so that he's hurt you. So shouting at him, basically, if you shout at a child who does that, they're just going to do it all the more, because it then becomes that downward spiral. So he's angry and has acted on impulse and he's hit you, and you've responded in a similar way. You might not have hit him, but you've responded in a similar way by getting angry back at the child and telling them off. So if you were to demonstrate that actually you now feel sad, he's hurt you, then that will have much more of an impact on the child's ability to understand what's happened than telling him off will have. So so it's really best if you don't shout back at them, and we certainly don't hit, of course we don't, but you don't shout back at them and you don't reprimand. You demonstrate that you feel sad, you maybe turn away and take the attention away from him for a moment, pretend to cry, whatever works to help him understand that actually he's hurt you. But realize that inability to think first before they act, that can last quite a long time, but certainly at 20 months, it's quite normal to expect that impulsive behavior will sometimes happen. So it's a case of talking about reading stories, talking about it outside of the situation. So you don't reprimand them at the time, you show you're upset and move away, but you talk about it, being kind, using gentle hands. You know, you can demonstrate it with your pets, you can demonstrate it towards him. You know, I'm using gentle hands, you know, be with teddies, whatever it might be. So you use the term gentle hands so he understands that that means don't hurt, because if you say don't hurt, very often children just pick up on the hurt, they don't remember the don't hurt bit. So it's a case of teaching through demonstration, really, but not telling them off, but certainly not condoning their behavior either. So I hope that made sense. So just while we were on that one, we will cover off some more as well. Was that helpful, Olivia, or was that? Yes, it was. Good. And you know,
Another question from Melissa and from an anonymous attendee. So we'll start with Melissa first. I will
yes,
allow her to talk. Hi, Melissa.
I think
Oh,
Melissa on mute.
yeah, I think she's on mute. But anyway, while she's still on mute, we have another question in the Q&A. She said, strong-willed 6-year-old loud class clown, and he's starting to be a distraction to others.
Yeah. And you'll find the next bit, Melissa, quite helpful, and certainly the next webinar as well, where we talk about the different genius types, different dispositions or personalities. I also had a child who was a bit like that, and I used to be called to see the teacher nearly every day, and I used to dread going to the school. And I would be asking the teacher what's happening for him at school. So if a child is engaged and interested in what they're doing, then they're not likely to be a class clown. So I think, as Kylie says in this chat here, that he's most likely not being challenged, and he's most likely bored. And if children are bored, they're going to find their own entertainment, just as we would as well. You know, if you've ever had a boring job, then you just make your own fun in that work. So I would be talking to the teacher and asking what's going on, how is she extending him, how's his schoolwork going. Now you might get two responses there. You might get a response that says, well, he's finished all his work and you know he's doing really well. So then you'll be asking, well, how are you going to extend him? What are you going to do to make this a bit more challenging and engaging for him? That's one response. The other response could be, well, he's not doing any of his work. He's just disrupting the whole class. He doesn't even put pen to paper, for example. Now, again, if that was the response, I then again would be saying to the teacher, okay, then, so what are we doing to support him? I would be asking questions around, is he understanding? You know, there are many areas where a child could be struggling at school because he could be dyslexic, or there could be other things going on. So I think if you ever get a response like that from the teachers at the school, you need to be speaking to the school and asking what strategies are in place to support him. And it could be he needs more support, or it could be he's bored, as we've said. Yeah. Good.
Another question from Anis is, if a kid is very naughty at school but behaves at home, what strategies would you be able to do to get him to stop being naughty at the school?
And again, I'd be speaking to the school. So, you know, if you've got no challenges at home with behavior, there's something bothering him at school. So again, it could be boredom, or it could be something to do with the actual school environment. So, and we'll be talking a little bit in a second about all the different temperaments that children have. Because sometimes the school environment can be too stimulating, or there could be no opportunity for children to make choices for themselves, to be able to manage their own energy and be able to self-regulate. So if it's too stimulating and he's overwhelmed and, you know, his energy's going like sky high, then it can be very, very hard to bring it back down to be able to concentrate and listen in class. So I would definitely be talking to the teachers and asking what their strategies are first, and getting to the root of the problem as well, because there's something else happening in the school if that's the case. Because more often than not, you hear it the other way around. You know, my child behaviour is really challenging at home, but he seems to be fine in school. So that's often the comment you get. So when it's that he's coping fine at home but not coping at school, then you really need to be looking at the school environment and finding out what's going on for him. And again, you know, yeah, called in this week to talk to the teacher, and we agreed he's bored, so we put a sticker chart in place to help his behaviour. So Jess, I have to say, if he's bored, then doing the sticker chart, it's kind of an extrinsic reward to teach him to cope with boredom. And I think that no child should have to cope with boredom. So I would again be saying to the teacher, what's happening to extend him? What are we doing in school to make sure that he's totally engaged in learning all day? Otherwise, what's the point of going to school? So yes, giving him a sticker chart because he's managing to cope with boredom very well is a strategy, but it's not a strategy that serves him. So you really want to make sure that the school is providing a curriculum and content that's engaging, so he's actually getting something out of school rather than just learning to cope with the boredom. So I hate to sound so blunt, but you know, I'm here for the children, so I'd definitely be speaking to his teachers. Yeah. So I have a 23-month-old. We'll cover this last question and then the rest of the content, and then we'll come back to questions. So I have a 23-month-old that hits, bites and throws toys. He waits to do things, and if I tell him to stop and move him away, he will try and hit, bite or blame me or headbutt. Okay, so at 23 months, very often you find that we all have this natural urge within us, right? And it's related to our natural genius, our natural temperament, but it's also part of being human. So, you know, a natural urge would be, you know, for children, sometimes they go through phases where they maybe need to be throwing things, or they need to be moving their bodies a lot more. All children need to be moving their bodies all the time, but you know, they might go through a phase where they start hitting, kicking, biting, but that seems to be the response to everything that's happening. So, and you'll know that it's like how can I explain? It's like how can I? So for children who have this physical response to what's happening, like this urge to kick, bite and hit, then look outside of that behavior and say, okay, this is like an itch he needs to scratch, right? So my children is having this urge to be throwing things, happens to be throwing things at me and other people and furniture and all of that. Then look at how you can provide that for him, so he can have that experience in a way that is not around a trigger or a behavior. So for example, if your child's throwing things, then redirect the behavior and create a game where you maybe put a bucket at the bottom of a hallway and give him bean bags or balls to throw into the bucket, or you put a target outside and chalk on the fence and give him some balls to throw at that target. So he has an outlet for that desire and that urge he has to be throwing. And it can be the same with anything. You know, when children have a pent-up energy and they need to express it, they need to release that energy, then to be able to provide an activity where they can do that safely can actually reduce the hitting and kicking of people quite considerably. Same with children who are going through a biting phase. More often than not, biting is due to frustration, and often children who have the cognitive ability to know what to say to express themselves but can't quite form the words and don't have the vocabulary yet, they will often feel a high level of frustration, which can lead to kicking, hitting, biting, etc. So for biting, having a excuse me, having a rubber toy or something for them to bite onto, because they need to release that energy. So finding a way to do it that is safe for everybody else is a good way to do that. Teething rings and sensory objects, things like that, are great things to give to children who are going through the biting stage. So I just need to, I hope everybody's okay for just another few minutes, because I notice we're over time, as often happens. Sorry, everybody, once we get into questions. So if we look at children's natural temperaments, and you know, we call them their young genius, there are 4 natural temperaments. There's dynamo, blaze, tempo, and steel. And these 4 natural temperaments are related to the seasons. So we've got dynamo, which is spring energy. That's really high energy, enthusiastic, bouncy, fast talking, excited kind of energy. And you'll see this, we are all of these energies, by the way, but you will find that your child or the children in your life have one dominant energy. And yeah, so you'll see that some children are just more dynamo energy and springy than other children. Then you have blaze energy, which is summer energy. That's blaze children tend to be very sociable. You said before, I think it was, can't remember what your name was, I'm sorry, but about your child being a disruption in class, entertaining everybody, life and soul of the party. That's blaze energy for sure. So he's likely to be a very blaze energy child. Then we've got autumn energy, which is a lot more sensitive. It's more settled energy. It's tempo, and it's about being more practical, more hands-on, more quieter and calmer energy, which is, and the spring energy is quite the opposite. So you'll see that these are opposite temperaments. And then we've got steel energy, which is winter, which is more introverted energy. It's reserved, it's more thoughtful. So steel energy children will be the ones on the outside observing what's going on. And you think sometimes that they're not really engaged or learning, and then suddenly they'll do something that absolutely blows your mind. And it's because steel energy children often won't do something until they feel confident they can do it right. They'll spend a long time observing other children and situations before they take a risk. Whereas summer energy are more extroverted, they're life and soul of the party, they're everybody's friend, people love them because they're very entertaining, and they find it really easy to cope in large groups and social situations. And then dynamo energy is more intuitive, head in the clouds, daydreamer, creative energy, love all the arts and crafts and messy play. You have to remind them to actually stop and have lunch, or to visit the bathroom, because very often they're so busy they don't even think about it. And then we have the opposite, which is very sensory and in tune with their own feelings, in tune with everybody else around them. They're the really caring, nurturing children who worry about everybody else and can spend a lot of time worrying about their friends as well. So we all need all these different energies, all these different geniuses have expressed their challenges in their behaviors in very different ways. So sensory children are more likely to sulk and withdraw. Introverted steel energy people often struggle with communication, so they might lash out rather than verbalize their feelings. Extroverted children can be very communicative, they can be very harsh with their words, and they're the ones that might say, I'm not your friend anymore and you're not coming to my party. You know, these things that they say on impulse but don't necessarily always mean. So every child, every different energy has a different way of expressing their behaviors. And like I say, we are all of these energies, but you will find that your children do have a dominant energy. So, and like I said before, dynamo children are creative and imaginative, so they can often be coming up with all the ideas of what mischief to get up to, and come up with great plans and involve all the children in their wonderful strategies and games. The sociable, communicative children, the summer blaze children, will often be right in the middle of it, getting everybody else on board, supporting them with the whole plan. They'll often get the blame for what's happening because they're the loudest and the one that people see, when it could actually be the dynamo child that instigated the whole situation. Then you've got the tempo children, who are very practical, and they'll love to get involved, and like I say, they'll be there nurturing everybody and making sure everybody's got a part to play and supporting them. And then we have the reserved and thoughtful steel energy children. Now, the reason I go through those energies is, if you understand that your child is a reserved steel energy child, then you will understand that he or she will find it overwhelming to be in a large playgroup situation for extended periods of time, because they're introverted, and you put them in a situation that is high energy, very social, very extroverted experience, and that can cause behavioral challenges, often meltdowns, tantrums, or they might just cling onto your leg throughout the whole time in playgroup, for example. So when we understand the energies, we can set our children up for success by preparing them for what's going to come next, by having realistic expectations that, maybe going to 20 minutes to this social gathering or this playgroup, while you build up his tolerance for those situations. And there are lots of different strategies we can use, but when we understand our child's natural temperament, then we can make sure that we set them up for success by not putting them into situations they can't cope with for too long a period, and maybe introducing them to these situations and supporting them with these situations by coaching them, and building upon the time they spend in these overwhelming places. That's one example. I mean, we can talk about this more on future webinars because we are now 10 minutes over time. So if I might just say, if there are any questions, Sam, that maybe I do some email responses so everybody can have their questions answered. So again, if you understand the child's temperament, you can limit stressful situations, and you can set realistic expectations, and you can also better understand them to teach them how to manage their emotions. Now, all of this is a huge topic, so we will cover this on the next webinar, where we'll be looking at all the different temperaments and how to support children. I've covered off a few things here, but when we've got 4 of them and lots of situations we can talk about, I think we maybe, excuse me, maybe leave that for next time. And in the meantime, any questions that are in chat that I may not have answered, then we can answer them by email. Are we all good with that?
We do.
Yeah.
Yep. We have
Yep.
2 actually. We actually still have 2 questions.
I'm happy to answer the 2 now. Yep.
So the first question is, my 3.5-year-old reacts with anger or totally meltdown crying when she's talked to about something she shouldn't do. How do I handle this? And
yeah, that's because it sounds to me like she's feeling remorseful and is upset that she's done something wrong. So I think that if she's got to the point where she's really upset because she's done something wrong, then she's clearly got the message. You've explained to her that, that behavior was unacceptable and she's got upset. So my feeling is that she needs reassurance that it's okay. We all make behavioral mistakes. We all get it wrong sometimes. You know what to do next time, and just give her a big hug and reassure her that it's all okay. We know she's still learning. If I've understood that question correctly.
Okay, and we have one more question, Angie, before we wrap up.
Yes.
My son is obsessed with TV. Okay, most of us can relate and ask and ask. He doesn't get it every day when we have been trying to limit it, but he gets really upset if he doesn't get it or when we turn it off. Worse when it is TV time or on an iPad or iPhone. He is 4.5-year-old.
Yeah. And no surprise that he gets really upset when he can't watch TV. If you look at the world around us, that he's watching adults around him, if you're like most of us, Ashley, I'm not making assumptions. Well, I guess I am making assumptions, but there's a TV in most homes. Most adults have their own computer. Nearly every adult has their own cell phone. Many households also have tablets and iPads. So our children are seeing us constantly looking at these screens, constantly responding, engaged with what's happening on the tablet, phone, TV, whatever it might be. And it's an inborn urge, it's an innate driver, excuse me, in every single human being to want to use the tools of the culture. So phones, TVs, tablets, TVs are all tools of the culture. So it's actually part of the sorry, it's actually part of the human development that we will crave the tools of the culture, and that's exactly what he's doing here. So I think it's a case of, yes, limit the TV, because we know that it's not good for children to be on TV all the time. And it's really important that we don't spend too much time on digital devices as well, because children need to experience the whole of life and the whole of the curriculum. So explain to him why you can't do that, but reassure him and tell him that, it's all okay. It's like, we understand that this is really important to you and you will have your TV time, but right now we're going to do this, and just try and distract him onto something else that he might be interested in. It's very hard when you can't get what you want, and adults, another person, albeit his parents, have complete control over what he can do and when he can do it. There's very much, it's very hard for children to learn to self-regulate their emotions and make positive choices for themselves when we seem to be controlling a lot of what goes on in their lives. So if you can have a routine that he has certainty around when he's having the TV time, that will really support him, because he'll know that actually, of course, I'm not having TV right now, because that happens at, I don't know, 5 p.m. every evening, or that happens at 9 a.m. every morning, whatever your routine is. To have that rhythm and the routine is going to take some of that resistance away, because he'll get used to that. But it's perfectly normal for him to want to do it. He just needs support in coping with the emotion when he can't get what he wants. And that's loving support and loving understanding as well, because it is pretty hard when you want something and you can't have it. Doesn't mean you give in. Like I say, you have that routine that makes it easier for him to cope with. I hope that makes sense. Has that been helpful, or is it? And again, yes, someone's put here, Callie, tell him to turn the TV off. Absolutely. And at 4.5, you can give him a clock. And you can say, I don't know how long your TV time is for, but you can either say, when the clock gets to here, that's when you turn the TV off, and he has the remote. And do a countdown as well. So, instead of it being right, the TV goes off now, it's 6:30, it might be you've got 5 more minutes. So he's actually able to prepare himself for the fact that the TV is going off. Oh, okay. Kids YouTube. This is helpful, Kylie. It turns the TV black once the show's over. If it's 5 minutes, that's it. Cool. That's good. That's a great tip. Thanks for sharing that, Kylie. Great. All right then. Well, Sorry we went over, everybody. I hope you can join us for the next webinar where we can go into a bit more detail on the natural geniuses and the natural temperaments of children. And it's really great when we have your input as well. So thanks for your tips and for your questions too. So gives us the opportunity to have this conversation. Yeah, are we all good? So thank you all, and I'll see you next time.